when they're raising, everyone's like out there talking about it. Like when you haven't, it's like, bro, who are you? Why are you here? Like things are gonna come up that you can't predict.
And how do you tell people that? You go from like this founder who's raised to be like, oh yeah, guys, yeah, I'm getting a job now. Like,
you need like a story, like a plan in your head of like where you're going next. Then emotionally, that's very hard to deal with.
Yeah.
I think every co-founder relationship needs like some sort of therapist. Current like 3-stage plan is.
But happiness, like, what does that even mean? Hi, Amir. Welcome to the podcast. You have inspired me for so long. I saw your journey on LinkedIn, reached out, and now we've eventually become friends. Like, you rejecting your McKinsey offer was something that was like really inspiring for me because, you know, I was thinking about like rejecting being in the corporate space. You know, you're building an ed tech, and yeah, you just have so many sort of learnings that I really want to get into.
In an ideal world, I would have made it up to the next arc, but like, you never really see when people like haven't quite got there.
Exactly.
Everyone talks about like when they've like,
Yeah.
when they're raising, everyone's like out there talking about it. Like when you haven't, it's like, bro, who are you? Why are you here? It's quite interesting, like little.
And I would love, no one tells these stories of like when it doesn't work, because most of the time it actually doesn't.
Yeah, most of the time it doesn't. But like you'll be like, oh yeah, I'm the CEO, and then like 4 years later, like your startup will crash, and then no one will speak about you.
Yeah.
And then you're like, who's this nobody? But
and everyone forgets about you. Have you found that?
To some degree, but I've kind of chosen that. Like I very purposely chose my path to be one of like prioritizing happiness rather than trying to. Because I feel like a lot of startup CEOs, like not everyone, but a lot of people like are aiming for greatness. They have this what I call the greatness wound. So they were like, there's someone who is super ambitious and they were told from a young age, you're going to change the world, you're going to make it. And one of the ways of fulfilling that burden is to do a startup because that is impactful. You're doing something amazing and changing the world in some capacity. And that's what I call the greatness wound. And what I think is people are still trying to fulfill that. And so they're doing it for their egos.
Yeah.
And what I decided is that I have that as well. I acknowledge that I have that, but I would, given the trade-off, like if there was a trade-off, I would prefer happiness.
Yeah.
So what I've done is optimize for that. And once I've got that happiness like all nailed down, I can then take more risks.
But happiness, like what does that even mean?
For an individual, there are certain things that facilitate happiness.
Yeah.
So it's like, the question I'm going to answer is what structural things facilitate happiness. So like, for example, if your sleep is bad, if you wake up at random times, you don't get enough sunlight, that like structurally is going to make you unhappy.
Yeah.
So for me, what I figured out is like above the basics, like I'm not going to explain like basic biology science, but beyond that point, I think time and money is obviously like
leads to happiness. Yeah.
Is the biggest thing that leads to that, and having lots of good close personal relationships. So all of those three things mixed together. But obviously the way that 9 to 5 is structured, 9 to 6 these days, is not conducive to having that. If you look at happiness curves across the world, they tend to drop around the age of 22 and go back up.
Yeah.
Because people are doing shit they don't want to do.
Yeah.
They spend their entire lives doing stuff that they don't enjoy.
Yeah.
So for me, I've been very bullish of if I don't enjoy something, I've like quit straight away, which has its pros and its cons.
Yeah. We're going to go into that. What struck me, because how I first knew about you was you were the OG student influencer giving people advice. Yeah. You got to the pinnacle of what a corporate career is, which people would say is McKinsey. You got your graduate offer.
Yep.
And that's all you'd been doing, giving people advice to get these like sort of top careers. And then you make a LinkedIn post saying, I've rejected the offer.
Yeah.
I quit. And how did you even get there? Like what made you grind so hard for something and then suddenly be like, nah, it's not for me?
I think the truth is, in a nutshell, is I didn't enjoy it. I kept a diary every single day or every other day of my experience in McKinsey. And just for me personally, it's not for everyone, but I just was not having a good time during my 3 months there. And I learned a huge amount. Like I still keep a lot of those learnings. It's incredible. But for me, like the hours combined with not enjoying it, I can do long hours if I love it, and I can do short hours if I don't love it. Yeah. But having both at the same time wasn't for me. So when I kept on deferring it, eventually they were like, you have to make a decision now. Like, we're not going to let you defer any further. Because people do that. They caught on. So I chose to say no, which was like one of the most challenging things.
Because does anyone ever do that?
Yes. Somebody else in my cohort did it as well.
Okay.
I'm not going to name her, but she had a particularly bad time the way they structured things. So I don't blame her. And it was like just too much. She was like, nah, I'm good.
Wow. So you quit this and you quit to start an ed tech company.
Yes.
So I used to follow you for like career advice.
Yeah.
Try to get into career. Then I was starting to follow you for education technology advice because I tried to build my own one too. So let's dig into ed tech. What was that? Why did you start? Tell us your story.
edX was like a little baby of ours, like me and my co-founder. It was something that we were incredibly passionate about. We wanted to, because for me, education was like the way out of poverty, you know, for a lot of our parents, that was like the way you did it. And I feel like I cracked the system. Like academically, I basically got perfect grades.
You did, yeah.
And I was like, I feel like there are things that I know that other people don't, and I can put that into a platform.
Yeah.
So that was the vision, that was the goal, and we felt like maybe we could make it into our dreams and like kind of travel the world and live all of that and make something really big. And that's what the vision was, like making education more accessible for millions.
So, okay, you were starting that. How did you go about starting the company, quitting McKinsey? Like, take us through the process a bit. Like,
there was a lot going on. It was quite complicated, but essentially we just started making a product. We initially had like a small team, and then we got users, so they did user interviews, got some feedback, then made a product, started iterating, put it online. We got TikTok ads, so we got influencers to like promote us, got a bunch of users, all that kind of jazz, used Google ads. And then eventually we got investment from an angel investor, and that was like crazy at that time, like getting that investment.
Crazy.
I was like, oh my God,
because that was straight out of uni, wasn't it?
Yeah, basically I was like, what, 21, 22? So having that much money at that age was like kind of a bit like, okay, what is this?
Yeah.
But equally it was also very, very stressful as well. Yeah. Like it's a very stressful time. But it was something that I learned an incredibly large amount from. Brilliant.
So how did you go about raising that investment? Like telling people the goal, the vision, like a lot of people don't invest in ed tech. How did you manage to get people to do that?
It was actually my co-founder. So the relationship we had was I can build anything. So technically he'll like give me a vision and I'll build it, and he'll sell things. So he sold the vision. He got the investors on board. Like I made like the investment decks and stuff, but he was the one who kind of sold that and got the money in the bank, and then I would iterate and make the products.
Okay, cool. So you were doing edX. What, you're not doing it now, so like what went wrong? Like step by step, what were the failings?
I think there's many different things you can say on different systematic levels. So I was to zoom out at the highest level. For me, first of all, doing edtech is a mistake, I think. Yeah. Selling to schools is incredibly difficult. It's like you're setting yourself up for difficulty. Even some of the biggest players, like take Seneca, for example, like have like a 99% penetration rate and barely convert anyone. So like edtech as an industry, I wouldn't do.
I can attest. It's just not even worth it.
And then on top of that, B2C, I wouldn't do either. It's just more difficult. You can do it. People do it, obviously. It's been done. It's just like you're choosing a hard mode, in my opinion. So that structurally,
So going into a bad market.
Yes.
Yeah.
Picking a market that's like, it's growing now, but it's like, if you sell edtech to young people, I wouldn't do that. If you sell edtech B2B to companies, great, fantastic, go ahead, like amazing. Then structurally, just in my co-foundership, like I would say, I think every co-founder relationship needs like some sort of therapist, like some sort of character who is like neutral, and every 2 weeks to a month, you can sit down and discuss all of your grievances. Having that space is incredibly important because you spend more time than most married couples spend together. So problems are going to come up, and you need that space and those structures to do that. That's the first thing I learned that is really important. Secondly, I think is focus. Is like have the needle. So the needle is like the thing that's most important, and focusing on that and making sure you deliver on what that is. Yeah.
So what went wrong? Because I saw your LinkedIn post. You're like, guys, I'm basically depressed. I'm not doing my startup anymore. me and my co-founder said no, loads
Yeah.
of things were going wrong. So what was that post about? Like, can you give us like what was going on in there that you were like, eventually, nah, this has to stop? Because the business was fine, wasn't it? It was just your relationship with your co-founder.
Exactly. Like we actually had a bunch more money like
Yeah,
coming
you had a lot of money,
along,
right?
and the investor was like down, and we were like, actually, we don't want to take your money because we're not enjoying it. Like it was all about happiness and enjoyment at the end of the day, and I wasn't loving what I was doing because we were having arguments over time, and I feel like I lost a very good friend of mine to the business. You know, it's like everything we were doing was we never spent any quality time together anymore. All the advice that we'd give each other was like, I was like, is he doing this for the business or is it for me? Like, does he actually care about me? Or is it for the benefit of the business that he's trying to do this? And that felt really difficult as well. And I think the other thing was like, the pressure became too much. Like it was about like, we have to do this, we have to win, rather than something that we love doing. It's like our passion. It wasn't that. It was like, if we don't win, we're failures. Yeah. And that is very challenging, and you're not going to succeed when you come at things from that kind of mindset.
So like, what were your arguments about, and like, how could other entrepreneurs mitigate it? Like,
I think our focus changed a lot. So what happened is like focus would change. I would build something new, and it wouldn't work. And I'm like, we're running out of money. This is not working. We should just focus on one thing. So I think focus, I would say. And second, like putting too much pressure on each other, because what happened is our personal well-being became intertwined with the business's well-being. In the sense that it was like we were going to run out of money. So when one of us didn't see the other person working, we were like, why aren't you working? Because when you don't work, I'm worse off. And that toxic relationship really crumbled the business because trust gets broken down. And when you don't have trust between your co-founder, like you can't operate. And I think that was incredibly damaging as well. So that's why I said the therapy, like having like a neutral party every month to kind of go through the things that will come up inevitably can prevent a lot of those things.
So you two are still friends today. So would you say you essentially gave up the startup to like save your friendship?
Yeah, that's exactly what we did. Yeah, because we could have continued. I think we probably could have sold it as well if we kept going for about a year.
Yeah, because it was running. It was.
Yeah, we had like thousands of users. Like it was doing decently and like some really good feedback. And I think we just were so done with it. So we actually like stopped, like almost like a breakup. We stopped speaking for like three months or so. Like
3 months. Wow.
Like not like in a no contact way, but basically we didn't chat.
Yeah.
And then we actually went to a couple therapy session afterwards.
No way.
Yeah, genuinely.
Really? To work on your relationship?
Yeah, because there was a lot of. I didn't trust any other third party. I was like, I want a therapist who can be completely independent because I feel like I'm gonna get screwed over.
Yeah.
So I was so defensive that I wouldn't trust anyone. So that's why I wanted that third party to be there.
So 3 months later, what made you think like, nah, this friendship, we got to give it another shot?
It's probably my oldest friendship I have with anyone. And I was like, I don't want to give this up. And for me, like, as I said, the deep personal connections is incredibly important.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, so I was like, if it's possible to recover it, that's something I want to do.
Okay, I want to take it back a bit because you also made some hiring mistakes, didn't you?
Yes.
Were they co-founders that came on board?
There were a couple of other co-founders, and that was a huge, they came on, then they left. It was a huge kind of mess, basically.
Yeah.
And I think one thing I learned from that was the character of the co-founders you're with is incredibly important.
Nice.
Same thing as politicians. So like when you vote for someone, you don't like things are going to come up that you can't predict.
Yeah.
So people vote on personality and on character because what they're voting for is a set of principles.
Yeah.
That when that person's in power and uncertainty occurs, they vote for the principles.
Yeah.
They don't vote exactly because you can't promise certain things because things are going to change.
Yeah.
The landscape today and the landscape 6 months from now is going to be completely different. So as a result of that, with our co-founders, like we voted on like what they could do rather than who they were.
Yeah.
So my big thing now is make sure that the character of the people you're with is what you test for. Same with hiring people, same with co-founders, like character is huge.
What were characteristics that you didn't see, but you like were over optimizing for like what they could do? Like what was the...
I think we over optimized for talent and for technical skills, but we didn't value like integrity and trustworthiness enough. Like I think it was like people could technically do the stuff and we were like, oh, this person's so talented. Same in any company, you have that one person who's like so talented, but where if they make the entire atmosphere toxic for everybody else,
you
then
wouldn't want to hire them.
yeah, it's not going to be conducive. It just takes one person to do that. And same with your hiring, same with your co-foundership.
So what could you have avoided? Like,
I think what we should have done is ask certain kinds of questions which are all about character.
Yeah.
It's about what you do in your situation, what would happen if X, Y, Z occurred, or what they value, what brings them joy in life. Why are they doing this? What's the point? What's the purpose for that person? And those kind of questions, and making sure you align on those. And if you just trust the person and trust your gut on that, can be really helpful.
Cool. So I actually want to, tell us a bit more about that time. I know you've got like a lot more to say about it. You know, the fact that you had to get lawyers involved. Like, this is meant to be super tactful. So like anyone who is about to like hire someone else would know, I need to avoid this, or I need to do this to make sure that, you know.
Yeah, I think there are certain kinds of questions in interviews that you can ask that give you insight into character. So my first real business when I was 19, we hired a lot of people and we learned a lot of mistakes from that. So asking, for example, what someone would do if they win the lottery, what someone's values are, for example, what their friends say about them, what's most valuable to them in a friendship, like what they look for in a partner. These kind of, maybe not the partner question, but like these questions give insights into they give some way of looking at what the person's internal values are, what like really matters to them. And when you get a hold of that, you can get their principles, and that helps you to assess how they will act in uncertain situations.
So what became uncertain that they started changing?
What do you mean? So
like, they look good from the surface. What problems were you having then it wasn't great anymore?
I think openness and transparency. So the development they promised did not happen. Okay. So one of the biggest lessons I learned out of this was in-house development. If you're doing a startup, have a technical co-founder, or like have someone on your team who is doing the coding if you're like a software project. Like, we had so many developers that promised so many things but never quite delivered, and you just can't iterate as quickly. You can't do the things you need to do, and I think that's very problematic. Yeah.
And weren't you the technical co-founder though?
Eventually. But okay. I actually taught myself coding.
Right.
So I always knew, but I hadn't done it in quite a long time. So I taught myself. So everyone else is useless. They promised me so many things. We've wasted ages.
You're going to do it yourself.
I'm just going to teach myself. So that's what I did.
Brilliant. And what was some of like the deep learning points in your life from that experience?
I think ultimately it taught me resilience. Is what I'd say. Because up until that point, it might sound a bit arrogant to say, I never had a moment where I've been like, this has been challenging, this has been difficult, I haven't been able to do very well. In school, like, it was quite easy, university as well, like, wasn't challenging, got into McKinsey as well, got the offer, so it was like, everything up to that point was like, it's been really easy. Not easy, but I've been able to do it, you know? And I can say to myself at the end of the day, you know, I won.
Yeah.
And then something else comes along that's very difficult, and now you're like, oh, not everything in life will come super easily to you. Yeah. So I suppose that's the big learning, and how to deal with that and the emotions of that, and come to terms, and then come pick yourself back up and say, okay, let's go again. Let's give things another go.
So there was a point that you mentioned that, like, when things don't make you happy, you feel like you don't want to do it anymore. And I was just like wondering, is there any point in your life that you think you would stick it out for? Like, how, do you know what I mean? Like, if there's always going to be sort of challenges, how do you think you'll navigate it for your next sort of venture? Because I know, I believe we spoke, you want to hopefully build something again.
Potentially. It's something that's on the radar. I think knowing where your boundaries are, knowing what you're willing to sacrifice and what you're not willing to sacrifice, and for how long is really important. I think for me, I'm not going to give up my current happiness or future happiness anymore. So it's like, I want to at least be a little bit enjoying what I'm doing. But if I'm miserable, I know I can't cope with that. So knowing what I'm sacrificing, what the trade-offs are, and how long I'm doing that for, and just being prepared to fail as well. Like knowing that's a possibility. And if it happens, you just got to be comfortable with that.
Okay, fair enough. So my next question is your present life. So like, if you give us a bit of background of what you do now, how you've moved on, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've done a whole bunch of things since then. I've been a physics teacher. I've like been a coach, a management consultant, and then several startups as well. At the moment, I'm a software engineer, so I work at a biotech company, and we make human cells, and we do that for medical research. So it's very cutting edge, very innovative, and super interesting as well. So that's my current occupation, and I suppose where I'm looking to take things is eventually take those skills and build something else.
Yeah. And how did you go from startup to job? Because I've been finding that quite hard. Like, I mean, the reason, even when I'm strapped for cash, there's something about the lack of freedom that comes from a job that I feel like I really can't even do anymore. Like, how do you tell people that? You go from like this founder who's raised to be like, oh yeah, guys, yeah, I'm getting a job now. Like, I know I've said a lot of things there, but like, how does it just make you feel?
I think, you know what it is? I think when these things come up, you need like a story, like a plan in your head of like where you're going next. Because if you just like, oh, I'm like doing a job now, then emotionally that's very hard to deal with.
Yeah.
Because we humans, like we have events that happen to us. Like there are events that are agnostic.
Yeah.
And then from those events, we create stories that link them together. Like we have little narratives that flow.
Yeah.
And there's like an implicit direction out of those events which are completely agnostic to us. Like that's what framing is. That's how like, you know, advertising works. You create a little narrative, and we have that for ourselves in our head. And doing that, if your narrative, if what you're telling yourself makes sense to you and you're really happy with it, you can do anything. You can change and transition. But if your narrative is like, I failed, I can't do this, I have to do that, then it's not something you can emotionally cope with. Yeah. So I suppose coming up with my own narrative, saying, well, where am I going? What's the goal? So I'm, learning so much more about engineering. Maybe I might even move to like a 3 or 4 day work week at some point as well. Have so much time to work on other startups. That narrative for me is like, okay, I like where that's going. Yeah. Even if today it's like not perfect, I have the knowledge of where I'm going in the future, and that gives me the strength to kind of continue.
So would you say you're happy now?
Yeah, I think so. I know I can definitely be happier. I know there's ways we can go, but for the moment, I'm really like, actually, yeah, life is pretty great. Like in terms of the path I'm going on and where things are progressing towards.
Brilliant. So like, what do you enjoy most about life now?
I think just having that path, knowing where I'm going, knowing where I'm taking things, having that plan in my head, because that gives me a lot of comfort. Yeah. I have a plan, I know what I'm doing. It's very systematic, and my backup plans are backup plans. Like every eventuality is thought out. That allows me to enjoy the spare time and the activities I do so much more. Whereas I think a lot of people get anxiety, at least I would, when I don't know what my plan is. Like, if this doesn't work, what am I going to do? That gives me a lot of anxiety. So when I've thought through those eventualities and plugged every gap, so to speak, that's what really gives me a lot of strength.
Nice. I love that. So now we're going to play a quick game.
Okay.
Just to get to know you a bit more.
Interesting.
So it's called Would You Rather?
Okay.
And the first question is, would you rather have a startup that's acquired by a big tech company or one that becomes a big tech company itself?
If I pick it right now, that's my life.
Yes. I mean, hypothetically.
I would get acquired.
You'd get acquired. Okay, so you don't want to be a Facebook. You don't want to be acquiring.
The reason for that is because, again, it comes back to happiness. So I think, a hot take, I think most startups in the world are not doing as much good as they think. If you've ever seen this show Silicon Valley, it's like every startup's motto is to change the world. Most of them aren't. What you do as a startup is most startups are making middle-class people's lives easier. Yeah. So Deliveroo, for example, Uber, like doing great stuff, but like it's like you're not like curing malaria. Like it's like it's cool, but it's not world-changing the way you think it is. Impactful, yes, but it's not like charitable.
But I've always found it weird, sorry to interject, the stories people tell themselves. Like Facebook making the world more connected. I'm like, is that what you really think you're doing? Like,
I mean, in some ways it is, but also it's facilitating that for like the middle class people, like most big startups. And for me, I would, if I like made it that big, I would want to like give back. I'd want to, help other people, and being a big tech CEO is not going to facilitate that. I'm going to be part of the machine. And I'm not sure that's exactly what I want to do. Okay. So for me, like I would love to go back to the LinkedIn days, start posting, give people like telling everyone how I did it, and like giving them the playbook for free. Yeah. And then just doing charitable stuff. Yeah. So for me, like being acquired will facilitate that. Yeah. I just don't think I think startups are cool, but I think sometimes we lie to ourselves about the reasons about why we're doing them.
Doing it, yeah. And I remember we had this conversation where you really enjoyed posting on LinkedIn, but then you stopped for some reason. And I was just curious, what made you stop? You know,
I thought at the time I wanted to focus on like edX, but
yeah.
like in reality, what I loved doing was giving that advice, like helping out, like people sending us CVs during that kind of that LinkedIn heyday.
Yeah,
like,
it was heyday.
Yeah,
like,
it was really good.
You were on my like feed every day. Like I used to love reading your posts because it was so valuable.
I love like a lot of the insights I had like from McKinsey and other stuff like that. I would like completely like synthesize and give away, and there's a lot that I loved about that. And when you hear people's specific problems, like one of the things I was going to start with a friend of mine was like, you know, just like solve it. It's like you come to us with any problem, and I feel like systematically we can come up with a sensible approach. Because one of the things I really value is like complete, like I call them bulletproof plans, like completely systematic approaches that almost guarantee an outcome to occur, or as close to. Kind of, yeah. There are certain techniques and ways of thinking about things that can facilitate that. And that's how I got McKinsey. That's how I did a lot of my job applications. Like or a friend of mine who I won't name is like trying to sort out his visa situation, and he spoke to the best lawyers in the country he was in, and they were like, oh, this is impossible what you're doing. But his approach was so incredibly systematic that he managed to do what basically no one in that country does. So like the way you plan, how systematic you are, how much you think about every outcome, will definitely impact your success.
Okay, fair enough. So would you rather have a business that's hardware-based or software-based?
Both could be very cool.
Yeah.
I think on this one I'll pick software. 2 reasons. One, I'm a software engineer.
Nice.
So it's easy for me. Secondly, scalability. Like SaaS can scale like significantly easier. But there are like loads of cool hardware projects, like loads of them that would be insanely like amazing to do. I think if you can tap into that market, you do. I mean, Nvidia's the reason why their stock market's increased massively. If you do hardware well, like huge. And especially if you can do it in the West, because most of the semiconductors are made in Taiwan. They're moving abroad in Malaysia and stuff. But like, it's a big problem making our own one. So if you can solve that, multi-billionaire.
So you would be wanting scalability for money?
Yeah.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah, I think we shouldn't shy away from the true reasons why we want to do things. Because obviously you want to make that money, but eventually you want to give back as well at some point.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's on average will be easier to scale a software business.
Yeah, I think people tell themselves that, oh, you know, I like, you know, to help out, things like that. But money is
it's an important motivator.
Aspect,
and it's what drives our economy. So it's like, it is something that we shouldn't. I feel like a lot of society we shy away from admitting to things that we really like. We all buy into, but we like, for example, beauty is another example. We buy iPhones, we buy certain things, we try and look for beautiful partners because we value beauty as humanity. Like evolutionary, we are trained to value beauty, but to admit that is seen as like very shallow. So I think admitting these hard truths to ourselves helps us to move past them.
And what would you do with loads of money?
I'd probably give most of it away. I don't think I'd need a huge amount. I think, I'd just put into charitable causes.
So what about if you were like like a charity CEO giving away rich people's funds to people? Would that be fulfilling enough for you? Because if you're kind of doing the same thing.
Potentially, although I think that kind of, I'd say the way that possibly exists today is something like effective altruism. Yeah. So EA is kind of, you know, what's the most effective way we can give away billions? And organizations like the Gates Foundation, for example, some loads of amazing work to reduce diseases in a lot of developing countries. So there's stuff already exists basically, but you can like tap into that, help facilitate it, that kind of thing, that kind of jazz. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And last question is, would you rather have unlimited high-speed internet or the latest computer?
Probably I'd say high-speed internet.
Okay.
I think infrastructure is incredibly powerful for the world. Like in general, like having strong infrastructure like helps like yourself, the economy, everything you're doing. So there are probably things you can facilitate with high-speed internet you wouldn't be able to do with just your own, like having a strong computer, you know? So I think, in general, I would pick, as a general rule, I pick infrastructure for most things. Like I think it's the backbone that drives everything else that's kind of hidden in the background.
I agree. like I went to Ghana recently and some of the Wi-Fi was super slow. And I was like, how are actually people working? Like this is reducing productivity immensely. Like
massively. Yeah. One of the biggest things that we don't appreciate is how engineering and specifically plumbing has facilitated cities growing. The fact that we can deal with all of our waste is one of the modern miracles. And it's the only reason we can grow this large. Like,
for sure.
Yeah. It's crazy.
It's completely crazy. And so just got the final closing thoughts of the podcast. What does the future look like for you, Amir?
These things you can never predict, but my current 3-stage plan is, stage 1 was work in software for maybe a year, maybe 2, see what happens. Secondly is potentially move to something with reduced hours and simultaneously found a startup. So maybe 3 or 4 days a week, and then the rest of the time work on finding a startup. And then thirdly, depending on how that startup goes, potentially giving back or something else to facilitate that. But ultimately, you can never predict these things. I could come back in 3 months and the entire story might be very different. So it's a snapshot in time, I suppose. And we'll have to see how that transforms into the future.
But that would be your ideal.
It's what what is the ideal, you mean?
Like the ideal to reduce your hours and build a startup.
Potentially. That's more the pragmatic approach that I'm taking. How that's going to manifest, I don't know.
You don't know. Fair enough. And because you were the original LinkedIn career guru, is there any career advice you'd give to people looking for a new role?
Do you have any more information about the archetype that we're talking about here?
It's people who maybe want to work for startups, like what you're doing now. They're entrepreneurial, but don't want to found something just yet.
So the first one is understanding how recruiters work.
Yeah.
People never put themselves in the shoes of a recruiter or understand what the purpose of their CV is.
Yeah.
The purpose of your CV is to get your foot in the door and to convey that you're phenomenal as quickly as possible. And you really want to head up with excellence. In the same way, I don't know, people lose interest when they don't want to they don't really care. Recruiters are like that. You want to see as quickly as possible why that person's excellent and phenomenal. And really it has to be phenomenal. It has to be something that is impressive. And you want to convey that. It's the same as LinkedIn posting. You want to convey why someone should continue reading in probably the first couple of lines, Same way in a kind of podcast. You want to convey why that person should listen so early on. And people forget that. So making your things sound very impressive and framing it in that way as well. If we had some examples, I could show you the way people events happen in their life and the way you talk about it, you talk about yourself.
Yeah.
I can say you can say it with low confidence, and I can transform that sentence, and it can be this person sounds insane.
Have you seen the I changed a light bulb? How someone writes that on LinkedIn? I worked within a team to functionally illuminate, and you're just thinking you just changed a light bulb. So
yeah, it's that, but it's also the way that you frame what you're talking about, the way that you present the facts in a slight, you're never lying, you're just changing the way you present the facts to make yourself sound more impressive. But yeah, it's kind of a bit like that. So that's the first thing. Second thing is having a very systematic plan, having a list of all the startups, list of places you look every single day. The third is having your funnel. So it's you have your top stage, first, second round, final round, or whatever, or tests. You need to be doing analysis on that funnel. It's you do it for 2 weeks, you make applications, you see what happens. Then you look at the percentages and see where you're failing, and then you can hypothesize what's going wrong. Thirdly, recording interviews. If you're doing them online, record them, listen back to them. Then if you know someone who's really good at interviews, make them listen to the interviews and get feedback. It's often really hard to get feedback for interviews. And sometimes the feedback, it's not very useful. People will say one thing, but they won't really say exactly what they mean.
Yeah.
So recording your own interviews and and listening back to them is an excellent way of doing things. If it's a small startup, messaging them directly. So YC and that kind of thing, just send them a quick message. I had loads of interviews that came through
by just
literally DMing the co-founders on LinkedIn, that kind of thing. So those are some initial strategies. Ideally, to any approach to any problem in life is you can approach it with the startup methodology, which is how do you deal with uncertainty. And That is, you have a plan,
Yeah.
and what you want to do is iterate on that plan. So you have a hypothesis, you're like, okay, cool, I think this is how this is going to work. So you test, you apply for different stuff for about 2 weeks, or however long, and you have like a cycle, and you look at the results.
Yeah.
And then based on those, you make a hypothesis about what's going wrong, you test that, you gain information, and then from that result, you change what you're doing. If you do the same actions again, you'll get the same results. So necessarily, you learn from that, you iterate on that, and then hopefully something will change. And if not, you just repeat that. And that's like the very broad strokes, like high level approach.
Brilliant, brilliant. Okay, we like to end the Nova&Boba podcast on a high. So, yeah, what's your favorite thing about life right now?
What's my favorite thing about life right now? I think it's just the joy of being alive. Like,
wow,
isn't it? Like, I don't know. I find it kind of crazy that we're all conscious. Like, that's.
Do you know what? That hits me sometimes.
Right? You're
and
like in the shower,
even...
and you're like, wait a second. I have a conscious experience. Like, I can actually like make choices, and and I'm like experiencing this, and like you forget that because you get so used to it. But I think that's insane.
It's crazy,
right? Like for like thousands of years, millions of years, billions, in fact, you weren't, and now you're here. And that's, I don't know, that's kind of insane.
Have you ever had that question, like, why us, why now? Like, sometimes I think about it, but I can't even think about it too deeply because it's just something you can't even...
Yeah, I think it's like a majesty that I appreciate, and I don't really know any more than that. I can't claim to. But some of those questions are maybe the ones we're trying to answer. Like maybe some people's goal is like self-reflection and understanding of the self. Maybe that's the hardest thing to conquer.
We might never even find out. So the final thing, just any closing thoughts, anything you want to say, just let out. Just say anything you want.
Say anything I want?
Like any closing thoughts, any pieces of advice, words of wisdom, your mantra. This is your free space to just talk. Maybe anything you didn't cover.
I think the one thing I really, really believe is too many people spend their lives wishing things were different and never taking action, never changing. And that's one thing I think I've been very bullish on, which like if I didn't like something, I change it. Like I lived in different countries, I learned different languages, I changed my career like 4 times, became a teacher, startup coach, like entrepreneur, worked at McKinsey as well. Like I've done
it all.
Yeah, I've tried all the things, like, gave it a go,
Yeah.
And I feel like if you don't like it, then either you accept your situation or you change it and you do something different. And I think that's a lot of people live disliking their current situation and in discomfort because you have to you should accept or you should change. And we'll be happy that way. So I feel like more people should or ought to, or life would be better if they took those risks if it feels right for them.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Amir. Like you've been a massive inspiration for me. Like I feel like I follow your journey. Like you were a true sense of the influencer. Like when I was seeing you do your corporate thing, I tried to do the corporate thing. Saw you do an ed tech, tried to do an ed tech. So yeah, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.